All right. Let's see here. I'm trying to see participant view. Give me 1 second here. Okay. There we go. All right, now I can see participants. Sorry, guys. Thanks for hanging in there with me through this. Just trying to get this thing to work. All right. We got people coming in. We'll give it a couple minutes here, maybe like, I don't know, maybe not a couple minutes, maybe like 30 seconds more. I see that people are still joining. So thanks for hanging with us. Okay. Ding, ding. All right. I think things are looking good on your end, Gina. Things are looking good here. All right. Yeah, let's get going. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Talego, and on behalf of the Education Committee and the whole board membership of the Montana Nursery Landscape Association, I'm really excited to welcome you to the second part of our webinar series on organic lawns with our speaker, Ford Smith. So, Ford Smith, he grew up ranching and landscaping in Paradise Valley. He started Organic Lawn LLC in 2016 with a focus on helping homeowners better steward their tiny ranches. And in 2019, he co-founded Regenerative Land Solutions to bring similar ideas to large-scale agriculture in Montana. Also in California, and I believe also in the Midwest. So yes, and then that work culminated in a publication in Frontiers with Blue Point Conservation Science, and he did some PhD research at MSU. He also works with Kateri Carbon, I think I'm saying that correctly, which is a carbon developer focused on improving cattle grazing management. And he's also deeply interested in rangeland ecological health, how it ties into day-to-day management decisions. So last week we got to talk about some basics, especially about working with clients and establishing expectations. That again is how Ford and I actually met, was having a friend and a common client that was very much interested in having an organic lawn and very much interested in a very, very specific aesthetic for it. And so Ford's been a great help to me and to a lot of other people in trying to, yeah, you know, make magic happen. So I will hand it off to you, Ford. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone, for making it. So, yeah, we'll jump right into it. Yeah, it's last week we went into some things, and I kind of wanted to go deeper into a few points here about good lawn management, but we'll start with a little bit about soil health, four biological laws, dive into lawn management, talk a little bit about what are weeds, go into personal preferences, and then talk about long-term maintenance planning. So soil health. What is soil health? It's a popular buzzword. Yeah, everybody likes soil health, but there's no real great agreed upon definition. And if you get too deep down the rabbit hole like I have, yeah, it's tough to really figure out exactly what it means, and everyone has a different definition. So rather than focus too much on soil health, because it will never overcome the four biological laws, we'll talk about those instead. So this is from Matt Ricketts, who I work with a lot in ranching, but it's the same with lawns. One is if you keep down the shoot, you kill the root. Nature does not like bare spots. Moisture is key. And if given the chance, nature would like to put back plants that are better adapted for that environment. So we'll get into all of these, but that first one, keep down the shoot, you kill the root, that is mowing too short. Nature does not like bare spots. If you have a lot of bare spots in your lawn, something will fill that in. Moisture is key, obviously. You gotta have good sprinkler coverage and water your lawn for it to stay green and healthy here in Montana. And then if given the chance, which we tend to try not to give it the chance in our lawn situations, nature would like to have something that is better adapted to our environment come in. So in southwest Montana, where we don't get that much moisture, some of these turf grasses drought out. Other plants with deeper taproots will try and make their way in. So this slide is from a study from 1955 from Kreider. It really helps bring home what mowing short does. Obviously, these are different grasses, but they go through in the study a bunch of different grasses, and this concept holds true. So the more you defoliate the top, the more the roots die. So here you can see is just little percentages, but if you remove too much, then you get total uh, root growth stoppage. So you will just slowly lose more and more roots. And here on the left, you can see taller grass, deep, healthy roots. This is going to do a lot better in a dry situation. This is going to build a lot more soil deeper down. On the right side, mowed too short, grazed too short, the roots are dying back. You're going to need a ton more water, and you're going to have a ton more weeds popping up in here. So this is a foundational study. It is universally true, and you got to keep it in mind. So what is mowing tall? And I tried to figure out a better way to say this. I just pulled this straight off our website. This is the same thing we've been saying for 10 years, but it's harder to implement than you'd think. So we still find a bunch of lawns that are mowed short, but the goal is to mow deep use less water, get healthier, deeper roots, and promote denser turf. So it's simple. You let it grow up to 5 inches and then cut it down to 3.5 inches. You can use a ruler, a good rule of thumb, a good way to check, especially if you're having somebody else mow or you're trying to check your crew that's mowing, is you get out your credit card, tall ways, you shove that straight down into the dirt. A credit card's 3.5 inches tall. So if any grass is sticking up over that credit card, you know you've mowed too short. You want to check a bunch of different places. Oftentimes people will say, oh, we have it at 3.5 inches, but that might just be in a perfect situation. If you have lots of bumps or unevenness, you could have lots of places where it's getting mowed much shorter. So you want to check that. Um, you never want to remove more than 1/3 of the blade per mowing. This is good to keep in mind for many reasons. One, let's say you go on vacation and your grass is 8 inches tall all of a sudden. If you chop it down to 3.5, it's going to put more stress on the grass. Also, you're going to end up with just a lot more grass clippings. So it'd be better to even raise it higher and just slowly work your way back down rather than try and lop it all off at once. And then the third tip is keeping those blades sharp. A lot of people forget about this. I often don't emphasize this one as much as I should, but you definitely want to sharpen your mower blades. So they're cutting instead of tearing. It looks better, it'll look greener. You'll have less of that gray white stuff on the tip. And then also it can help prevent plant diseases from like the cut rather than the tear makes for healthier grass. So you can do that through all these tips. Also make sure you mulch the grass clippings. I'll have a slide on that here later. So mowing too short, the main thing, like we said earlier, it kills the grass and it weakens the root system. It encourages other plants to come in, such as dandelions, plantain, other plants that can be mowed much shorter. It encourages drought stress. It requires a lot more water. And those short roots create less biological activity deeper down in the soil, resulting in shallower, more compacted, less healthy soils. It also can create bare spots. So I'm gonna skip this one. There's a video that might not work. So for one of those tips, the weed whacking, this is a common problem. People will mow tall, but then they'll weed whack it right down to the edge. This is the same thing. It kills the grass right along the edge and you get more of these weeds coming in. Also on these edges, they're hot spots, like that concrete's absorbing a bunch of heat. So this is naturally going to get stressed more anyways. So the last thing you want to do is cut it down too short. For grass clippings, like I said on that first earlier slide, you definitely want to mulch it back in. So that does a variety of things. One, it helps build back up your soil organic matter. and then also increases your natural nutrient cycling. All of this can get broken down and fertilize the grass that you already have. So if you cut it and throw it away or cut it and compost it, you are just throwing away really valuable organic matter that should be incorporated back into your soil profile. So if your grass clippings are piling up and you feel the need to rake them and that you need to mulch them, you're likely the mowing directions are not being followed correctly. You're letting it get too tall, or you've mowed it too short and the soil is not very healthy, so it's not breaking down those clippings. Or they're severely over fertilizing. Often, like a regular chemical lawn care company is just pumping down way too much nitrogen. That's just getting it to grow unnecessarily fast. And if it can't break down fast enough, then you know you don't need to add any more nitrogen in there. These, and then also all that extra fertilizer, it burns through your soil moisture faster. So if you've put down a bunch of nitrogen fertilizer and it grows faster, you're just wasting more water by having all that unnecessary growth. And these lawns in Montana, they're rarely nitrogen deficient. It's usually they're lacking some sort of water. And I mean, if you guys all work in this industry, if you have, I'm always curious to try and find a replicated tissue sample study that shows that these grasses are nitrogen deficient. Like, there's a huge difference between the tissue tests and the soil tests, and we can talk about that later if we want. So another important thing is uh, watering deeply and infrequently. So this is, yeah, deeply and infrequently. This is the key to getting those like, so if you're mowing tall and you want deeper roots, you need to get that water deeper into the soil and you need to train those roots to grow down deeper. Um, we just have some tips on there. This is just another simple thing we've been saying for years, but people always ask like, how do I water deeply and infrequently? And generally they want to know these minutes on the clock, and these are different sprinkler head types. But the key is how much water is hitting the ground. So you could have pop-up sprinklers that are spaced really wide apart. And you could run it for 20 minutes and you're going to get half as much water as if that square was half the size. So if there's, every system needs to be truth checked with sprinkler cups, these will get you in the right ballpark, and then you can go through and adjust your system. Something that we do that most companies don't do is we try and get you to water the same amount each watering event. So when it's cool in the early spring, you water once deeply. Get that water as deep as possible. And when it warms up over between 70 and 85, you'd water twice a week. And then if it's really hot and you want to keep it green, you can water 3 times a week. Rather than some like seasonal just settings like that, they will have you water the same amount of days, be that 3 days a week or 7 days a week, and then just cut down and water less in the spring and the fall and water more. But you're not using your water as efficiently as if you're watering it deeply each time. So deep and infrequent watering. Those are general guidelines, but it's gonna look different based on your underlying soil structure. And I'll have a slide from last week coming up next. So in deep soils, you can water deeply fewer days a week. In shallow construction hardpan soils, you might have to water a little less deeply, more days a week. It all just depends. You're gonna have to experiment with it and find out what works for your soils. Yeah, do not use the seasonal adjust if you can avoid it. So as you like on this one on the left, these are deep soils. This profile can hold a lot of water. So this one could get watered deeply once in maybe like twice a week when it's super hot and still stay really healthy and green. This one on the far side, this is as far as this probe could go. You're going to need to water a lot more often. This lawn is going to have a harder time staying very healthy with 3 days a week. So you might have to add the fourth, but you don't want to get into adding 5, 6, 7. It starts to just get crazy. And this one is going to take a lot more help than this one is going to take. Um, so how do you do these sprinkler cup audits? It's very simple. You can buy these little rain gauges, sprinkler cups. We've got links to them on our website. This was a customer who called in and thought that they had a nitrogen issue here. Um, this part is green and this part was brown, and they were convinced that was a fertilizer issue. But we asked them if they would do the sprinkler cups instead. We went out there and helped them. In the green areas, they were getting almost an inch, but in those brown areas, they weren't getting much at all. So I think he had it down, I think he said 2 millimeters in the dry area, which is basically no water. That's just like barely getting the ground moist and it's evaporating out. So in this situation, he decided to go through and they're fixing their sprinkler heads, but some of these spots just need another zone. Just an old sprinkler system from 20 years ago. It's not getting good coverage. And so that's how he's going to try and fix it. If you do go through and start to do upgrades on your system, we really want to recommend not installing 4-inch sprinkler heads. If you can spend a tiny bit extra money up front to get a 6-inch head, it'll pop up over the grass better. So if you say, especially because you're going to start mowing tall, a lot of these 4-inch heads are designed for people who mow short. So if you let your grass grow up to, if you cut it down to 3.5 and your sprinkler head's 4 inches, most of the week it's growing up over top of your sprinkler head, which works if you've got great pressure. But in an ideal situation, if that sprinkler head was taller, it would shoot over the grass better. Does that make sense, Emily, or am I explaining that too fast?
Yeah, and I guess I'll just jump in here too and just let people know that there's a Q&A box that if as we go along, if you have questions, go ahead and type them up and drop them in there. And then we are going to have Q&A towards the end. But really quick, just about so if you're letting it grow to 5 inches tall and then you have a 6 inch, then the idea is you're getting an inch above where that is. Is that am I understanding that correctly? So that the grass in front of it's not blocking it.
And just those, yeah, with the 4-inch heads, if you have low water pressure and you're using like one of these type of nozzles, it can get blocked when it's if the 4-inch head and you grow it up to 5 inches, and part of that grass is going to block some of your flow. Like
Gotcha.
it's not getting the
Are
perfect.
6 inch, is that like a really special thing? Or like were you saying that 4 inch is standard?
I
Or
see mostly 4-inch. It must be the cheapest and easiest ones to do. So it's just they have to dig a hole 2 inches deeper and it pops out 6 inches instead of 4 inches. It's a different sprinkler head.
okay, okay. Do,
I
do
I
they make a
rarely,
retrofit riser or something like that? Do you know?
yeah, you can just swap them out.
Oh, okay, okay.
And a
Cool.
lot of the times, the other reason that you want to do that is just so let's say you get a perfectly installed 4-inch sprinkler head, and then somebody steps on it or it just sinks a little bit. It's really easy to go from 4 inches. All of a sudden, now it's just at 3 inches. It's sunk. So if you maintain it perfectly and you have them at the perfect level all the time, you're fine. But with a 6-inch, you have a lot more buffer. So
Okay.
6-inch
Great.
sprinkler head sinks 2 inches, you're still in the clear. So yeah.
Thanks.
So on that, yeah, so what we do is as we had that PDF earlier that showed about how to do deep and infrequent changing from 1 day a week to 2 days a week to 3 days a week, back down to 2 days a week to 1 day a week, it's gonna make you have to come and check out your actual sprinkler box. So here you can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So when it's cool out, you would just water on Monday. Warms up, you'd do Monday, Friday. And then when it's really hot, over 85 degrees, you would add Wednesday. And then if it cools down, take off Wednesday. So you're going to have to spin this dial around and hit the on off button, which is not asking a lot, but it's asking more than what most people are willing to do. But once they understand how important it is for their grassroots, for their water efficiency use, I mean, it's worth it, but it is asking a little bit more from people than the seasonal just. You can just hit seasonal just and you feel like you're doing this, but you're actually doing the opposite. All right, enough on watering. What are weeds? So we'll talk a little bit about weeds. Weeds are whatever we don't want. It's kind of as simple as that. Kentucky bluegrass is desirable in a lawn, but like the ranch I was at this morning for another client, they have Kentucky bluegrass creeping into their rangeland. Basically, if you overgraze rangeland, Kentucky bluegrass can handle being cut shorter than blue bunch wheatgrass, like our state grass. So you end up killing out the blue bunch, and then you end up with just a bunch of Kentucky bluegrass that is spread out from somebody's lawn more than likely. Um, and so it's a horrible weed and it causes a lot of economic damage in ranches. But in lawns, people love weeds. So it all just depends on what you want to call a weed. Um, the state of Montana MSU, they have a list of noxious weeds, and I'll show a slide about that later. Note dandelions are not on this list. They're not technically noxious weeds, so something to keep in mind. And then also clover is not on that weed list either. And clover is really, like we talked a lot about, I think, last week. Clover is really important it's a legume, it fixes nitrogen. That means it takes nitrogen out of the atmosphere, goes into the root nodules, the rhizobia bacteria can create nitrogen for that plant, and then that clover dies and that breaks down and creates more nitrogen for all of the grass. So clover, a lot of people think of it as a weed, but I do not like to think of it as a weed, and original lawns did not think of it as a weed. So there's some noxious weed information. I'm not going to go super deep into it, but the priorities are a lot have to do with like, you know, is it already here? Is it something we want to stop from spreading, or is it something that's been around for a long time? And then also like how bad they are. There's other lists that can go through weeds and how bad they are for other metrics, but like sulfur cinquefoil is a really bad weed in rangeland situations because it looks like other cinquefoils, but it's different and it spreads. So like that would be like on some ranchers, that'd be the top of their worst weed list. But for lawn owners, a lot of times people, thistle obviously is a noxious weed. Canadian thistle, people don't like that. We talked a lot about that last week. That's one that's definitely worth addressing. But clover, dandelions, it's just personal preference. And that's what we get to next. So each customer has a different set of personal preferences. And most customers are actually couples. There's usually more than one person in your customer situation, and couples often disagree. Um, and you can't have it all. Eventually, you need to decide. Like talking to a customer right before this Zoom, and they want to get rid of the thistle, but then they're really worried about the pesticides for the kids. So people go back and forth. I like thinking of myself as a lawn therapist sometimes. I can try and help, but eventually that couple just needs to decide how they want to deal with it. We can give them all the best information we can give them, but at the end of the day, they're going to need to decide. They're going to need to have everyone needs their own weed list of things that we think are weeds and we want to treat and take care of. But as far as lawns, kind of like we said last week, you want to manage for what you want, which is healthy grass. And clover can help with that. And that's a good place to start with all of these basic management tips we went through. For long-term maintenance planning, like we talked about grass, clover, lawn, it will use a lot less inputs. It will use a lot less water. You won't need to use chemical nitrogen. It will help crowd out a lot of weeds. So that's something if you want a lower maintenance lawn in the long term, grass clover can help a lot. You always thank yourself for putting in taller sprinkler heads. That is a good thing for what we said earlier about how the grass grows up to 5 inches, and so the 6-inch head can help more. It will also maybe give you a little more time in between having to go out there and raise your sprinkler heads. Yeah, cutting costs on lawn installation will always end up costing more in the long run. A lot of times that's outside of our customers' control. They bought a house on the west side of town. It was built quickly. They tried to cut costs, so they just rolled sod on construction hardpan. If you could go back in time, you would try and convince them to put down some topsoil before they did that, because you'll burn your water bill is going to be a lot higher. You're trying to control any of the weeds you don't want is going to be a lot more expensive. It's going to need more. It probably will need more fertilizer inputs too. So we really try to get people to not skimp on them, but if you bought a house, then there's nothing you can do. You manage it the best you can. Soil amendments versus chemical fertilizers. One is I like to think of as an investment in your soil, and the other one is short term, makes it greener for a minute, it might grow a little faster, but for the most part, those chemical fertilizers are running off into the environment. There's lots of studies, even the USDA's got studies where 20 to 80% of the chemical nitrogen folks put down on their fields just goes back to the environment pretty much immediately. Yearly core aerations are key. Some companies are pushing like liquid aerations. Those don't really work. Like we talked about last week. If if you want a highly diverse lawn with a mix of forbs and shrubs and legumes, and if you want a very diverse situation, that can naturally relieve compaction. But a traditional lawn of just grass is going to need a core aeration every year. And then like long-term maintenance, this is kind of a side tangent, but educating your HOA, that's worth it in the long term, like spending the time to try and convince them of these management techniques and tell them the good things about clover, stuff like that. It's worth putting in the time. Um, they often have rules. These can be like with good education and explaining where you're coming from, sometimes they can help you bend those rules or change those rules. And generally, as long as you don't have a noxious weed problem, if you tell them you're trying to do something with your lawn, like they know you're not just doing it out of laziness, then they will likely leave you alone. I have found working with many, many customers there. So that's all I've got for this one.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ford. And yeah, again, if you guys have questions, just type them up and drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll go through them. Yeah, it's interesting just jumping from some of those images you had last week about the bare spots and how uh, so much of it is moisture related. And it was kind of like once you've seen it, you can't like unsee it. Like I would see these areas as anywhere I go around now that I see these bare spots, and I'm like, I wonder, because you think, well, of course, the sprinkler system just I mean, it must be working if there's other places, but yeah, those cups. So do you go out to clients' homes then? Like, is that part of the service that you do?
Yeah, we do what we call it as a sprinkler audit. Like we will go through and audit your system, but we honestly don't even do the cups. I have the cups and I'll leave the cups. The problem with the doing the cup, like I can go through a system and help to identify coverage issues and pre-program and program the clock. But the cups, you have to run them overnight. So we'll do that. We'll leave the cups. It runs the whole system overnight because you gotta run it for an hour to figure out what it is, and we can't just hang out for an hour. So yeah, we do the simple sprinkler audit, and then we help give them the cups and help them do it. And for the most part, for years I was trying to push people to like learn about it on their own, but now I've realized like people get busy. So like for our mutual friend Emily, I came out and did the cups, and it was educational. So yes, I will do it if people really want it. But for the most part, if you go through a system in 45 minutes and look at all the things. It's usually pretty easy to identify the coverage issues and get it fixed. And those general times are good enough. Often it's like you turn on the system in the middle of the day. They haven't turned it on in the middle of the day all summer. And you're like, oh, these three heads are just gushing water. They're all broken. This tree branch has sticking out 2 feet and is fully blocking all of these heads. It's usually pretty obvious. But yeah,
Got it.
so we
Yeah,
do
well, I like what you called it. You said like, we have to truth test the system,
that.
because that is another thing I've noticed too. There's some technology now with like sensors and things, and I actually got to like download an app on one client's place that was like showed me okay, how often certain things were running, and I was looking, I was like, this hasn't run in like 2 weeks. What is going on? And it turns out like there was this area, it was a lot of like heavy clay, and then there was mulch on top. And so it thought it was wet all the time. And it was in that one little spot where the sensor was, but like it was complete, nothing else was getting water and everything was turning brown. I was like, I don't know. And also, admittedly, too, like for me, I do a lot more like gardening, landscape design, landscape beds. I will do drip, like if somebody stubs it in, but if somebody like I actually don't even have a irrigation system for my own lawn that's still here. Um, like dialing that stuff in, it's just kind of interesting how we kind of jump from that very obvious, like, is it getting enough water? to it must be something that is not that. We go there pretty quickly. Um, and then we do things like, you talked about like the nitrogen, and actually we have a question here. So thanks, Carly. So what do you recommend for soil amendments instead of synthetic nitrogen?
We do a variety of things. I don't want to get like too detailed into it, but I mean, organic fertilizers are generally better. They're much lower nitrogen content. Like I went through the grant I was working on last year with MSU. We were going through all of these different nitrogen sources for organics and conventional. And like you could use chicken manure, you could use corn gluten meal, you could use alfalfa meal. There's all of these different products, but they all have much lower nitrogen contents than urea, which is like what a lot of people use. And that's just it's so hard to concentrate that stuff naturally. But the advantages of using something that has a lot less nitrogen, or advantages of an organic fertilizer, is it's got a whole bunch of other organic material in there, which is really important, and it breaks down slower and it doesn't get lost as fast. So we were trying to on that study, we were trying to pin down like if a 422 is as effective as a 3000. And it kind of like sometimes you do see the same results. And I think that's mostly from all of that in the 30, 28 of those units are just getting back into the water system so quickly that they're not even being used. So that to answer your question, yes, we use some organic fertilizers, and then there's all sorts of amendments out there. Humics, kelps, all sorts of other complex carbohydrates like that. Yeah, we use a variety of them. And I'm happy to, if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to talk more with her, like specifics. But yeah.
Well, and then, one of the things too is typically, I mean, there's some things that I've found it's like, well, no harm, no foul. It just may be a waste of money, but that doing like soil testing to see if you're actually missing something, or is nitrogen really that critical for having a lawn that you got to have the nitrogen? Or because doesn't snow also take a lot of nitrogen down in the lawns? Am I thinking of that wrong? I might have that wrong, but
No. When you get into testing, that's a whole giant rabbit hole. So soil testing, there's many different ways to do it, but for most of them, it's testing like what is um, plant available at that moment in the soil. And so like and it's bulk soil testing. It's testing this whole core of soil. So roots only are absorbing stuff that's in the rhizosphere, which is that tiny little sheath around the plant root. And so there's all sorts of chemical interactions happening between the plant exuding sugars into the rhizosphere and interacting with bacteria and fungi in the soil in that tiny little sliver. So when you take a soil core of like the whole big thing, it's like you're sampling outer space and
yeah.
hoping you get like a spaceship in there, you know? You never know. So with the bulk tests are basically a tool for them to sell you more fertilizer as opposed to a tissue test. So when you test the plant, you're testing how much nitrogen is in this plant. And that's
Okay.
a much more accurate way of deciding if it needs more nitrogen or not. If the plant tests and it doesn't need more nitrogen, then your soil says you do need more nitrogen, trust the plant. Don't dump a bunch on the soil. It's just gonna all go away. So we did tons of studies with this. Like one field we tested it, like you could see in the four different quadrants, all four corners replicated samples needed more nitrogen. But then when you did all the tissue testing, all of the plants had plenty of nitrogen and production was good. So some sort of interaction was happening between in the rhizosphere that wasn't getting picked up in the bulk soil sample.
Oh, very cool. So I continuing on this, this nitrogen stuff. So nitrogen, like if you're doing this like conventional thing, people put like a high nitrogen, and then there's like a lower nitrogen. Um, and I always thought it was this strange thing where it's like people put a whole bunch of nitrogen on in the spring, which like I feel like made it grow faster, which then mean you had to mow sooner. Um, but with Well, I guess that's the interesting thing too about clover that do you think that it can fix enough nitrogen typically? Like, what would a symptom be of a lawn that might be nitrogen deficient? Like, truly.
I mean, the obvious answer is like a very nitrogen deficient lawn would not be as vibrantly green, but we've kind of like gotten confused on how green lawn should be. So if you want it to be crazy green all the time, you could just constantly put a bunch of nitrogen on there. But yes, it will grow faster. It is pretty unnecessary. And most of the brown spots are drought stress spots. Um,
Okay.
Mm, Yeah, with nitrogen, you got to be careful. I mean, too much nitrogen also can create nitrogen burns and all sorts of issues. Like I think I talked about last week in my condo example where they fertilized twice. Canceled one lawn care company to get another lawn care company, and they both put their nitrogen down, and it caused all sorts of issues. But yeah, so um,
Yeah, I even saw one time we were chatting with some people. We have, like the Scudder Diagnostic Lab here that does like the plant pathology. And we were, trying to investigate that someone's lawn had like all of a sudden just all gone to seed very quickly. And somebody said it was like too much. It might have been just nutrients full stop, from a fertilizer, but I think that was ended up being the consensus is that this thing just forced it to all of a sudden go to seed, which was very, very strange to all of a sudden be like, what is going on with this lawn? I actually have not seen this before. Um,
strange.
where you just push it that far, I guess. Um,
But
but
to go
yeah,
back to answer your question with the grass clover, a grass clover lawn will fix enough nitrogen and be healthy in a normal healthy soil. There's always outlier cases, but if you have, and there's studies on clover, so if the soil is like more nitrogen deficient, then that grass clover mix will push more towards clover. If that soil has plenty of nitrogen, it will go back towards grass, and it kind of goes back and forth, and creates a happy balance somewhere in the middle. But yeah. You don't do. And the reason people put down all that nitrogen in the spring and the fall is that is the logical time to fertilize these cool season grasses. But it's like if you needed production, if you're trying to feed your family off the hay bales from your lawn, then it might make sense to put a bunch of nitrogen on in the spring. But if you're like a normal homeowner and you're trying to save water and you're trying to mow once a week, if you over fertilize it, you're gonna have to mow twice a week, which just gets crazy. And that's where we talked about like the grass clippings not breaking down fast enough. So if you're just putting down too much nitrogen in the spring, yeah, it might not break down fast enough because there's so much volume of grass clippings because it's growing way too fast. And also all of that chemical nitrogen, generally combined with chemical pesticides, is damaging your soil's ability to function to break it down.
gotcha. So, okay,
Too
yeah,
much.
it's like a chlorine shock or something on a pool, but with nitrogen.
Yeah.
Um, so when you're saying so mowing once a week, twice a week, like let's assume ideal conditions with watering, you're getting adequate water and you haven't nuked it with a bunch of nitrogen. I'm trying to wrap my head around like, how fast a lawn grows. That because what I do see is that sometimes people will like lower their mower deck and stuff because like, well, I only have mowing done once a week and I'm on this fixed calendar. So they push it down really, really far because they're thinking like, well, it only gets done once a week, so it has to be really short. Um, but yeah, that like it from what you were saying, it does sound like you should be able to go a week with a growth rate without someone calling code compliance. I mean,
You should, if it's like in the spring, there are times where it's growing fast. Faster, but once a week is generally fine. And when it's cool, when it slows down in like the heat of the summer, you really should, I mean, you probably get away with less than that, but it's good to keep mowing it regular every week. It's just like the simplest way to do it. But yeah, you definitely don't want to mow it down shorter too. Yeah, you don't want to optimize around that. You want to optimize around like what's going to make the grass healthier generally, you know.
right, right. So maybe it is a thing that if you might have to do a contract where it is 2 days a week till 4th of July and then something like that. Um, and and I guess I'm putting that in the context thinking of specifically that kind of Kentucky bluegrass monoculture situation, which leads to the next question about species for lawns besides clover. So, I mean, there's lots of different grass species, and there's clover. Um, what else are you guys seeing in there? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different like turf type tall fescues that look like Kentucky bluegrass that use a little less water. That's something that we work a lot with. There's so many different varieties when you get into it. I lump it into we had the slide from last week where we had all the different lawn choices. So you've got your like golf course lawn, your organic lawn, your wild lawn, you know. So I mean, we've had seen folks do what is it called? Sheep fescue.
Mhm.
Um, and that is the problem is once you get away from the traditional lawn grasses and clover, it doesn't really look like a lawn anymore. So
Ah,
this fescue, it's nice, it's soft, it looks cool. I like it, but it doesn't look like a traditional lawn. And then it also like grows in these little clumps. So in between the clumps, you get almost bare spot, you know, and if you water it a lot, like nature, some of these grasses, like you could have a really healthy site in Montana that gets 12 inches of rain and you have blue bunch wheatgrass clumps and then bare spots in the middle. That actually is ecologically a high similarity situation. And there's not going to be weeds in the middle. That plant's got that big root system and it's sucking up all the moisture and nutrients and absorbing the sunlight. And you have like this healthy situation. But if you have sheep fescue that you water, you have these bare spots in between, all that extra water and those extra nutrients are going, something is going to want to take that. And in this situation, this client that I'm thinking of, dandelions took over because there's dandelion seeds everywhere and dandelions grow really easily. So yeah, yeah, you just got to keep in mind what you want it to look like. So I've also seen folks doing all sorts of other creative ideas, but they kind of fall out of the lawn bucket at a certain point.
I have seen it too, and it does seem like, and it must, I imagine it has to do with probably like, the underlying soils, is that you start with some sort of mix and then it drifts, where it's like it might have been, you might have started with a certain percentage, right, of like, a bluegrass in there, but then all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't see any bluegrass anymore. Another thing I saw too is that there's like I think they call it like a contractor mix, where that they add annual ryegrass to things. And I feel like it like germinates really quickly and stabilizes some things, but I guess the theory is that then it just doesn't come back and lets other things fill in. Do you use like an annual, if you're seeding stuff?
I don't just because I that makes a lot of sense in certain situations, but if you have there's a second page of the watering chart that talks about new seeding that I didn't include. But if you water properly, um, you can get perennial grass seed to germinate right away. In these lawns, they're so small. And I mean, most people have sprinkler systems, so you wouldn't need that annual generally. But yeah, people do that. And then people can do that. You can do that on a longer time frame on like ag lands or in forested areas where you, let's say you put some orchard grass out there with your natives and you know that the orchard grass is eventually going to die out and the other stuff's going to take over that you want. Kind of just like nurse crops. You can do it with annuals or even some shorter lived perennials. So
Hmm. I think I've also seen like yarrow, but maybe not like our native yarrow. But I think I've also like in some mixes too. And I always thought I was like, well, I guess if it was like in balance, it would be a nice little something there in the lawn, but it seems like it would just drift one way or another, if it's not happy there.
yeah, and the drifting is gonna, I mean, how you water and how you mow it will also like affect what species are gonna thrive or not thrive.
Hmm. All right. Well, yeah. And again, if you guys have more questions, just drop them in the box. Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep picking your brain here about this stuff if you're all right with it. Um, but you mentioned like the HOA situation, and I will say that that is something that I have seen, where it's not necessarily like a mandate thing, but that um, as new board members get elected from places on HOAs, and there's this kind of slower turnover of the guard, that there is this shift away from the that big value placed on like the impeccable um, monoculture turf. And I'm just wondering if you have ever like gone like, you know, chatted with HOAs or helped people like write letters or done any type of like evidence-based stuff for people to have to even just like start that conversation.
All the time. I do Zooms like this with HOA. I Zoom into HOA meetings. I've met with a lot of HOA presidents in person. Um, Anytime a customer wants help on the educating, that's what I'm excited about. So I'm always happy to help them. But it ends up being a lot. Like one HOA I went back and forth with for the last 3 years, and they finally decided they wanted to get their lawn aerated this year. That's it. They don't want anything else. So it's like I'm happy to help them do that. But like they want just to get the regular cheapest chemical spray to kill the dandelions because there's three holdouts in there. But I agree with you. I think that it is shifting, and I think we'll probably see a lot more of folks trying to do something different and move away from it. There's only so many choices. Like nobody wants an HOA wants to spend a bunch of money to redo the whole design generally. And then if you want to keep it a regular grass, you can add some clover, but it's hard to really make affordable changes once it's set up a certain way. But the easy low-hanging fruit is always like, well, maybe we'll install taller sprinkler heads and maybe we'll get this mowed taller or we can go through and change how their sprinkler system's set up. But doing stuff bigger than that with HOAs, I haven't had a lot of luck with seeing them like go too crazy with it yet.
Yeah, it does seem like you have to let them arrive at their own consensus first, and then, it's their call to make from there. One thing I have noticed in with clover, it's like kind of rhizomatous, the way in which it grows. So have you seen like what, or could you speculate perhaps on when clover is dominating out grass? What could be occurring there, and then like how could you go about reintroducing turf grasses if you're ending up with mats of clover exclusively?
So I went to a big lawn on Friday and it was brand new turf just a couple years ago and now they've got lots and lots of clover. But you go out there and it's like we can go back to this slide. It was one of these situations where they just mowed it way too short over and over and over again. So the brand new sod, which wasn't even installed on bad soil, just the grass died out and the clover's taken over. The clover is way tougher. It can handle getting mowed shorter. So that was
Okay.
one piece. The other piece was they thought they were watering 3 days a week, but when they looked at it, they realized they were actually watering 7 days a week. So it's just that the grass was getting cut way too short, and then the soil situation was weird from all the excess watering. And the clover was just doing better than the grass. So that's why it kind of the management is going to really affect where things are going to go. It's the same with grass. It's in lawns, it's so simple because there's just not that many moving pieces. But when you see it out on like rangeland health, you can see whole plant communities changing just based on how short it's being mowed by the cows. It's the
Oh
same
wow.
thing. Yeah. So to
Yeah.
reintroduce grass back into clover, I've never really had anybody have that tried to do that yet. But like things you could look for is like, well, maybe this is not getting, maybe this is getting mowed too short, maybe this isn't getting watered properly. And then the next steps would be if you really want more grass and you got tons of clover, that's a situation where maybe a little organic nitrogen would help the grass. Or
Yeah, do
yeah,
people have to like scrape it back so you've got bare soil, or put soil on top to then germinate grass into?
pretty hard to get a perennial to germinate in a really healthy perennial system. Like if the grass or the clover is really thick, it's hard to get grass to go in there. But if the grass is really thick, it's harder to get clover to get in there. But like what we've said in earlier slides and the last presentation, like nature hates a monoculture. So even a full clover system is not as robust as a grass clover system. So you'd think the grass would be able to creep in there a little bit, but I guess I've seen like big patches of clover, but I've never seen a whole lawn like go straight to clover from grass clover.
Yeah, well, you'll have to come by my place. Well,
You
and I
water,
think
are you watering it at all?
no.
Yeah,
So
so the
that that's something to do.
clover's gonna do a lot better than the grass
Yeah.
without water.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's very, very low maintenance. But because it's like when you have like these seed mixtures, if you mix this stuff together, it's like, okay, I want a nice homogeneous grasses, or like bluegrasses and fescues and clover, and I want them all in these like really nice proportions, homogeneously mixed. Um, but then it's interesting because you start that way and it's like, oh, this is great. And then like the first year it was like something out of a catalog. And then in subsequent years, because I don't water, I realized like the clover, it's just done its thing. Now for me, I don't have like kiddos that I have to worry about them running through with bees or anything like that. So it suits me just fine. But yeah, it's been interesting because I'm like, well, how does one reset this? Or maybe I'm like banking the nitrogen there with the clover for when I want to come back in and actually put grasses in. But yeah, without water, it's been interesting to see what survives with
Yeah.
that kind of it's an intentional neglect. I'll say that. So I'm being very intentional about where I'm putting my time with these things. So um,
That makes sense. Yeah, it's two parts. It's that, it's the water and the management, and then it's also just the species selection. So like some species, you get the nice mix on a spreadsheet, it looks like it's gonna go well. But then if you dive really deep into each one of those, sometimes you're like, oh, this one species is just gonna create its own, like, let's for a grass mix, let's say you had smooth brome in there. Sometimes you see people do that for horse pasture mix. It's a terrible idea. It just takes over and creates its own little monoculture. It's like one of the few grasses that will do that really well. And there's other ones that I mean will do it too. But yeah, so if you see a mix and it's got smooth brome in there, and you're trying to put it on your range, you'd be like, maybe I'll leave that one out, because it's just not going to react like you want it to react. But that takes, I don't have the skills to fully assess that on all of these different mixes. So that'd be something to, and then even you talk to 10 experts, they're going to tell you different things. So a lot of times they put the smooth brome in there for horses because they know the person's going to overgraze it. They're just going to leave the horse out. It's going to graze and they don't want dirt. So put in the toughest possible grass you can do. So it comes back to like everybody's got different goals. Everybody's got different preferences. It's this Rubik's cube. You twist one thing, it moves all the other pieces around and twists it back. It's just kind of complicated.
interesting. Another question about, looping back to irrigation. A lot of people, they get their irrigation systems serviced, they get them turned on, they get them turned off. I've seen where places offer like an audit as well. Do you have any language that you can share that can help someone, like either if you're, subcontracting out for someone else to do irrigation, or you have a client that does it, like, do you have some language to help um, someone make clear what you want from that you want your irrigation system audited in a way that is optimizing those things, like making sure the risers are tall enough or that you're getting the coverage? Like, what type of language would you use talking to a irrigation contractor?
I've been trying to use
Nice language.
language of deep and infrequent watering, which I don't think makes any sense to them. Or some of it does, some of it doesn't. But then also like proper sprinkler coverage. It gets tricky because sometimes the guy who installed your system is maintaining it and they wouldn't want to say they didn't do it right or something. You just get into like a weird situation sometimes. But yeah, for language, yeah, make sure you're watering deeply to try and grow deep grassroots and then make sure you're not watering every day. A lot of times they'll just people get busy. I've seen this all the time where it's like the customer calls, the grass isn't green. They say, "Well, I want more water." Like you come out here and they just turn up all the days. Just kick every day on. It's like if it's turning brown, we'll just turn on every single day and that'll fix it. So you don't want to do that. And then they get in like a little rabbit hole about sprinkler audits. I mean, the city does sprinkler audits and they're great and
Your
they help.
Bozeman, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Bozeman City does, but they're focused more on saving water and they're kind of doing a water deficit program. So as much like the least amount of water we can do to keep this kind of green, they basically just end up using less water than we use. But our system, you don't have to do the 3 days a week if you don't want to. Like you can do less. But if you stress out your grass, then you're gonna get different plants to kind of come in there. Kind of
Okay,
like
so they're doing like a water usage audit, maybe looking for things that are broken or not pointing in the right direction, or
they'll go
and
re
try to bottle
they'll
it
go
down.
through and redo the whole clock system too. They're just on the lowest end of water usage, which I can totally get behind. But if you're gonna do it that way, I would rather stack as much possible water on one day rather than do a little bit on 2 or 3 days. Um, just for all those reasons, for these like root pictures. Like the more we can build these roots deep down here, the less water you're gonna use overall. So
Okay. So this is why the language is important because here I'm like audit. What does an audit mean? Besides just checking to make sure things
it
are
means
broken. But if they wanted the person who handles their irrigation to come out and do something like that with the cups, and if it's something they didn't want to do themselves, do you think that most people would know what? So that's coverage and volume, would you say?
so like I'm trying to find this slide. So like this is checking for sprinkler coverage. Obviously, there is what I would say is a sprinkler coverage issue here. And sprinkler companies are great at what they do. I'm not trying to disregard them or say anything bad, even though sometimes we go back and forth on it. But they're like here, this is basically a zone issue. The guy came out and checked through it and I kind of agree with them that I probably need to just install more sprinkler heads. And you can't just do more heads. Eventually, you get too many heads on one zone, and then the pressure is really low. So this one probably just needs another sprinkler zone down this whole line. There's three in a row that were like this, so that could help. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, because sometimes I found too, like you said, like nothing on like irrigation companies, but sometimes having a more uniform language with stuff and because it can get lost. And it's like, well, I just want you to make sure my sprinkler system is working right. And it's like, well, for what and in what way it turns on. So, but yeah, but being able to give people that like, no, 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 this specifically is what I'm looking for. So things like coverage or is it running long enough? Like, is it getting enough water to the roots? So,
yeah,
um, cool.
it makes a lot of sense because people get their sprinkler turned on. Often customers will say like, my sprinkler system is fine. They came and turned it on this spring. It works great. But our system requires you to go touch your sprinkler box from spring to summer, summer to fall. At least for the people who are going to do the bare minimum, water 2 days a week at the beginning of the season, 3 days a week when it's hot, and then go back to two at the end. Like you don't have to do the 1 day thing if you don't want to, but it's going to require you going out there and twisting this dial, which these things are, you do not want to mess these things up. Like if you accidentally hit it off or you change the day, or you could zap all your landscaping. So I get why people are hesitant to touch these sprinkler boxes. But I'll do in our sprinkler audits, we try to educate them. So I'll walk them back here and we can go through and I show them how easy it is to turn off and on Wednesday. And you can do that without touching any of the other settings. But um, yeah, people are hesitant to touch these sprinkler boxes for
I
good
mean,
reason.
what is that? It's like, I love the efficiencies gained from like specialization, right? It's like, I don't need to know all the things. I have, it's not efficient for me to know all the things, but yeah, I've run into this with other parts of landscaping and where the kind of set it and forget it. I mean, sometimes you forget that these like there's living things here that do need water to survive. But I like the idea of, you had in your slide there, if you can have some fun with it, like with the kiddos, set up an experiment with things. Um, I can imagine a parent would love for their kid to take an interest in ensuring awesome lawn health. I think that would be a great situation. Um, but
And maybe
yeah,
there's
and because
science
there's
there.
seems like they're different ones. Some of them are, I mean, some people are doing it. There's smart controllers and stuff now. I would hope that I could see if something was dialed in enough that you could get that balance of like, you take something up to the threshold of water conservation without killing it. That may allow us to do that. Do you see like the technology um, kind of playing a role in all of this moving forward? Have you seen anything gee whiz?
Well, I've dove into a few of those systems, like the Ratio system, and I've looked into a bunch of them. They're tough. They're harder. They're not as simple to do our system of the deep and infrequent. You got to go through their system to try and figure out how to do that. So those are trickier. I think they can be very useful, and obviously we all want to save water. But I don't know, like what you said with the sensors and I haven't gotten good enough with with all of the new systems to make it work super well. But you can generally program them a little bit better. But even Ratio, like I called their headquarters a couple of years ago and talked I think they're based out of Boulder maybe, and talked to some like got through the rabbit hole and talked to some people and the root depth and the trying to grow deeper roots was that it wasn't on their radar,
On the
which is
radar.
but
Gotcha. Well, that's
alarming.
what sometimes it takes some time for these things to trickle down, no pun.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I guess yeah, the last thing that I'll say for those of us who are in attendance, we will send out an email with a survey on it. That is and there's a slide. Do we have a slide of that? Did we lose it?
Sorry. Oh, it stopped sharing.
Yeah, did a stop there. In any event, but we will send an email. Okay, so there's a QR code here that you can, if you've got your phone on you, you can take it out. Just take a picture of that. Well, where'd it go? It's coming back. Anyway, but yeah, so the ability to do educational stuff, it's grant funding from the Montana Specialty Crop Block Grant. Completing those surveys it's what allows us to report back to the Department of Ag on have we met our goals? How are we doing with our programming? And it also informs future programming as well. So really, really important that people take a minute to fill that out. If you are going to do it tonight, once we close this out, great. You can just disregard the email, but if not, it'll come through your email also. So we're really thankful to them because that's what support us able to do more great stuff like this. So Ford, this has been awesome and really informative. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah. And how can people find you?
Organiclawnmt.com. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way as our website. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone so much for joining us and hope you have a great night, everybody. Thanks, Ford.
Thanks. Bye, guys.